Well, I am going to start off by saying we absolutely love sponsors, and so whatever company you work at, if there's someone you can bug to sponsor something, be it a wonderful conference like this, or say Ruby Central and me, that's good for everyone. So yeah, going to talk today a little bit about what it takes to keep Ruby Gems a thing, keep our community running, the organization behind it. Shameless plug for it because, they pay my salary. And give you a little bit of a sneak peek about what it is we've done but haven't yet gotten around to announcing, and the things that we've been saying we're going to do for the rest of the year. So a little bit about me. You might have seen my handle somewhere. It's the same everywhere. I'm at GIDDINS on the internet. My name is Samuel, and I have been a maintainer of Ruby Gems Bundler and rubygems.org for what year are we in now? 2024? Yeah, it's been a decade. I don't know how that happened. And during that whole time, I've been contributing a bunch of bugs, so sorry about those. Please feel free to laugh. I'm trying to be funny, so it makes me feel better when you chuckle. So yeah, my role right now is I am the security engineer in residence at Ruby Central. And, very important, I forgot, sponsored by AWS, so thank you, AWS. What does that mean? I'm focused on security of the Ruby ecosystem with a focus on packaging security. So what does that actually mean? I work on security stuff for Ruby Gems. So some goals for today's talk. I'm going to try and entertain you all because it's 10 o'clock in the morning, and not everyone has had a chance to have their coffee yet. So as a thank you, I will try and make you laugh. I'm going to try and shock you with large numbers. And, of course, going to upload some slides that you can then take screenshots of and send to your boss and say, hey, you should support this stuff. It's good. We want our name on this slide. Okay, if that's too honest, I'll just try and lean into being funny. So, okay, that's the talk. Some of my personal goals. What have I been working on? What do I say I do? Funny enough, kind of to contradict the slogan of the conference, a lot of my job is to bring industry best practices into the Ruby community, foster communication between our community and other communities. That means enabling us to sort of continue existing as a large community that supports both people who write Ruby for fun because it's a fun and great language and we all love it, to the Fortune 500 companies, the Shopifys and stuff who build all the tools that make using Ruby fun these days. And also, not so shameless plug, I'm going to try and convince you to do the things that make me look successful to my boss so that I can keep my job. And also, I came to Scandinavia to see a bunch of sun. Yeah, you all are used to this. Like, you live here. It's novel to me to finish dinner, go outside, and be like, it's time to go get dinner. That's where the sun is. Okay, on to the more serious stuff. rubygems.org. It's everyone's favorite gem host, I hope. It might not have the enormous scale of, say, a GitHub or an NPM, but it's grown about 20% per year for the last 20 years. And for those of you who remember their high school math, compound growth make number go up. It's an absolutely significant service with a huge number of users worldwide. And Ali, how many people would you say are in this room right now?
Right now, I don't have any idea, but overall, 110.
Okay, so I'm going to make a guess and say that there are about 130 users of rubygems.org in this room right now. It's a really big service. No, like it's a really, really big service. So, interactive portion. Show of hands if you've ever run gem install. Okay. And a show of hands if you've ever put this line into a gem file. I see some hands down. I don't believe you. So guess what? You've helped contribute to all the traffic that rubygems.org serves. You are part of these. Congratulations, you are a statistic. So some quick statistics. About 10 to 11 million unique IPs per month download gems. As of some month, there was 23.3 billion requests made. That's 23 billion with a B. We peaked at about 20,000 requests per second. And as of when I wrote this slide, there were something like 167,947,962,107 gem downloads. The number has gone up since then. We don't accept returns or exchanges on gems, I'm sorry. Final purchase. Cumulatively, we've experienced hockey stick growth, and if we had any way of making money per download, I wouldn't be here. I would be owning a private island, because that's the sort of hockey stick growth that investors love to see in their pitch decks. So, quick story time, which was the weekend that I got paged and missed out on brunch. And the time that we might have hit 225,000 requests per second. Has anyone here ever served 225,000 requests per second? It's not fun if you're not expecting it. You might remember from 3 slides ago, I said, oh yeah, we normally peak at about 20,000. 20,000 to 225,000 is an order of magnitude more. Web servers don't like it when they have to serve an order of magnitude extra traffic. So I have heard that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Here's the picture. Pretend I've spoken for 3 minutes about this story. We had, this is a graph of the amount of bytes that our Rails application has served. Just the Rails app, not the CDN or anything else. The Rails app. And you can see number bounced around between weekdays and weekends. And then in May of last year, there was one weekend where that number spiked. And then it went way, way down, and it basically looks like 0 since then. So what happened? We had this old API called the Dependency API. It had been outdated for 7 years. We said, it should be safe to turn it off. It's the most expensive API that we serve. We can't cache it. It requires expensive database queries. It'd be really nice if we got rid of it. Let's start turning it off. We started turning it off. We had some scheduled brownout periods, so people would have a chance to discover if there was a problem. And during the very last of those brownout periods, which was to last a whole day, a week before we turned the endpoint off forever, there's that spike. And it turned out that there were some people who hadn't updated Ruby gems in 8 or 9 or 10 years. Does anyone remember Chef? This man here has deployed things with Chef, I can tell. Chef uses Ruby gems under the hood. It fetches cookbooks via Ruby gems. And I think by default, there was an AWS service that would provision a VPS for you with Chef, and it didn't cache anything. And every 30 minutes, Chef would go and run to try and converge your system, and it would start from scratch using a 10-year-old version of RubyGems that did not use the good APIs. It used, in fact, the dependency API that we turned off. We turned it off, and it fell back to well, it fell back to downloading every single gem spec one by one, over and over, every 30 minutes, from 3 IP addresses. Those 3 IP addresses belong to, you wouldn't believe it, but some servers sitting in AWS EC2. They were owned by a large public company that you have heard of, and the only way I managed to get them to know there was a problem was by going through the bundler source code, seeing what errors can I throw that will get a message printed out to screen, going into our Fastly configuration, writing some VCL and saying, if the request is from this IP address, with a user agent that matches this regular expression to this endpoint, raise this particular error saying, for the love of God, please stop, send me an email, let's fix this, make this end. And, I was told by my boss, let's find some more interesting numbers, but in the name of time, I'm going to assume it's okay that we move on from the numbers and use words instead. So, what have we been up to? And I say we, but naturally the things I talk about are going to be biased a little bit towards the work that I've done, because it's much easier for me to talk about that. So there's been some big stuff this year. And this year, 12 months-ish. We shipped a feature called Trusted Publishing, based on something called OIDC, OpenID Connect. Built another feature based on that allows you to automate access to the rubygems.org API from cloud services. We shipped official GitHub Actions for doing secure gem builds and pushes to rubygems.org. We shipped an alpha feature to put checksums of all your gems into your lock file so that your security team will be happy. And finally, bigger than it sounds, we migrated all of the rubygems.org asset pipeline to use import maps and stimulus and get rid of sprockets. Sounds simple, somehow took us 6 months to actually get it all working. Who'd have thought? And there's a bunch of stuff that's upcoming too. We've got a giant Figma file that has a beautiful redesign of the site. I meant to grab a screenshot. I'm sorry I didn't. I have been working on building a compliant SigStore client for Ruby that depends only on the Ruby standard library. Right now, there's a working group in the bundler Slack that is working on building out organization support. So let's say you work at a big company. Let's pick a big company that has a bunch of gems. Let's pick on AWS. They have something like 300 different gems. Wouldn't it be nice if they could have one organization that owns all of them? And wouldn't it be nice if, say, you could be certain every time you download a gem that says it's from AWS, it actually came from AWS? So that's the namespacing feature that we will start working on once we ship organizations. There's also been some small stuff that we've been working on. We removed avatars from rubygems.org. Does anyone remember the period where you couldn't see any faces on the website? So we did that for privacy reasons because Gravatar is Gravatar is a 15-year-old service written in PHP. It has all the security properties you'd expect of a 15-year-old service written in PHP. The way it works is you pass in an MD5 of an email. Ooh, yeah. So essentially that means that we were leaking everyone's email to show avatars. So that was bad. We removed the avatars, and then we put them back. So they're avatars again. The site looks like there's real people on it, not just a mock-up. Built a proxy that rubygems.org now does to fetch the avatars, and then the CDN serves them. We've also worked to make gem install and gem pristine and bundle install and bundle pristine faster. Apparently it's up to 8x faster. That's not bad. One particular thing there, bundle pristine used to only work in a single thread. It meant that if you were trying to bundle pristine, say a Rails application, with a bunch of native gems, it would take 3-4 minutes, whereas a clean bundle install would take 45 seconds. Bundle pristine now also takes 45 seconds. This made me very happy because I have a tendency to edit my gems locally, and I really disliked waiting 3 minutes to reset it all to a clean state. Okay, so that's the big stuff. But there's a lot that also goes on behind the scenes day to day. Just like you think in your job, there's the features that you ship and you talk about, but that's not really what you're working on and what your day looks like. So to keep all this running, we deploy our massive web service with way too many requests that we serve. We have a sort of discontinuous manual deployment process, the industry standard of something builds the container continuously, and then someone presses a button to say actually deploy it. And we do this anytime between multiple times per day, or if we're lucky, multiple times per week if I forget that there are changes to deploy. We also have an immense focus on having zero downtime deploys, because who likes it when they can't bundle install? It's kind of disruptive, right? So we take that really seriously. Everything we do has to be absolutely zero downtime, no questions asked, no excuses, end of discussion. Intentionally taking the site down is out of the question. And as a part of that, we also need to have zero write locks taken every time we do database migrations or upgrades. And you can watch out for a blog post from my teammate Joseph on how he pulled this off repeatedly using PG Bouncer and RDS. And here's a little spoiler. It's about repeatedly running your automated upgrade script on staging and figuring out where you can and cannot revert the upgrade. Painful lessons learned the hard way. We also now have a 24/7 on-call rotation. Oh, I was going to say it's 10 o'clock. I'm on call now, but, time zones. So I will be on call in 9 hours. We have a follow the sun on-call rotation with members in Australia, India, the Czech Republic, Spain, and the US. I'm the person in the US. And that means, sometimes we stay up late or wake up early, so we get some FaceTime with each other, usually on Friday mornings. I have about 50% success rate being awake and at my laptop by 9:30 a.m. on Fridays. I'd say that's pretty good. And all of this is expensive. That all sounds like stuff that a big company does. A company with revenue and investors and money. And all this would absolutely not be possible without support from our generous sponsors. So AWS gives us a lot of credits every year, which helps offset most of our infrastructure costs. We run basically everything in AWS. We have, I was going to say we've got a good sampling of the 3-letter acronyms, but there are now so many Amazon Web Services that we're onto the 4-letter acronyms too. Fastly donates, I'm pretty sure this is missing a 0. That should be about $1 million a year in donated services, estimated at the retail rate for bandwidth and number of requests served. Datadog donates monitoring services for us, and Honey Badger provides error tracking. Yeah, there are errors. We try to fix them eventually. And we're also supported by direct donations to Ruby Central. So Shopify has, Shopify has given $1 million over 4 years to support the security and reliability of Ruby Gems and rubygems.org. This is what has been funding the on-call rotation primarily, as well as some other ongoing open source teamwork. The German Sovereign Tech Fund has given us about 863,000 euros over the last 2 years, which has funded both general maintenance and security-focused improvements. And yeah, I think it's really funny that there was a while I could say, like, my work is sponsored by the German government. I promise I'm not a spy. More recently, we've gotten some support from the OpenSSF's Alpha Omega organization. They've provided money for a security audit and are also the ones funding the work to add organizations to rubygems.org. And last but certainly not least is AWS. As I mentioned, they give us a bunch of credits. They sponsor my role as the security engineer in residence, and give them a round of applause. They've paid for me to be here today. I really bet you didn't expect to walk in here and be giving Amazon kudos. So all this requires a bunch of work. We've got 5 engineers on staff, and all of them, except for me, are part-time. Thanks again, AWS. And for most of my teammates, this is a second job. It's something that they do on the side. They are very grateful that the work that they were doing now, is at least in part paid, and they're not being asked to just spend nights and weekends for free doing this stuff. But it is, unfortunately, a side gig for them. We also have a close-knit support team from a bunch of companies in the Ruby world. HSBT from NPAD and Ruby Core. It manages the integration of Ruby Gems and Bundler into Ruby proper. Some of the folks from Shopify's infrastructure security team have been contributing, specifically Eric Kursovich and Jenny Shen. Mashe at Mend runs our security response program. And of course, there are individual contributors like you. If anyone here has ever been to the US and, watched a show on PBS, it's kind of like that. All this was made possible by a grant from the German government and open source developers like you. We receive, support, feedback, and PRs from all around the Ruby community, and we appreciate that most of the time. Sometimes the feedback isn't very nice. We're going to be honest. And this expertise that we've built up to be able to run this, service and maintain these client libraries in a sort of mature way is hard won. as I mentioned earlier, I've been working on this stuff for 10 years. To be able to continue building on this large foundation we have, we want to be able to retain the people who are doing this and have the domain knowledge and sort of have the battle scars. And the financial support that we get, it comes and goes. Recently, there's been a lot of interest in funding security work, and that's been good. But then there's also sort of the whole tech downturn thing we've all been experiencing for the past year and a bit, and that's been not so good. So that makes it hard to sort of build a team for the long term. Also making this difficult is the fact that the infrastructure that we have constantly falls behind. Again, it's a web service. This happens. You get new versions of things like Postgres and Kubernetes and Memcached and OpenSearch and so on and so on. And each new version of each of those pieces of infrastructure requires someone to test out the upgrade on staging, verify it works, figure out why it doesn't work, fix it, deploy and monitor on production, rinse and repeat. Then we run in AWS and services are constantly being deprecated and we get warnings saying, hey, we're going to restart this for you and you need to upgrade this and we no longer support this version of Postgres and so on. That takes time to deal with. We get new versions of gems that we use and there's new versions of Rails constantly. RubyGems.org is one continually maintained app over 15 years. 15-year-old code bases have a long history. Started on Ruby 1.8 and has been upgraded and converted to Rails, going through Rails 2, Rails 3, Rails 4, 5, 6, now Rails 7. It's a lot of upgrades. And we try really hard to maintain sort of the canonical open source Rails app, something that you can say like, hey, I wonder how a real Rails app does X, Y, Z. I can go and look at rubygems.org. It's open source. I can copy paste what they do. Buyer beware. There's also constantly new best practices that our industry loves to come up with, in addition to new acronyms. We love our acronyms. There's sort of this old, don't use that. That's the bad old thing. Use this now. Anyone remember with Rails 7.0 and 7.1 and whatever the next version of Rails is going to be, it's the whole, sprockets, that's a thing of the past. Use propshaft. That took us a couple months to figure out. Don't use, Webpacker or any JavaScript bundlers anymore. Use import maps. That took us a couple months to figure out. Don't write Sass anymore. Use Tailwind or whatever the next big thing is. Okay, fine. And finally, we also like making work for ourselves. The service that we build, rubygems.org, it exists mostly to serve RubyGems and Bundler as sort of clients. And so we introduced, almost 10 years ago at this point, what we called the Compact Index, which has enabled faster dependency resolution and features like, hey, you're running an old version of Ruby. Let's not give you a version of a gem that doesn't support your version of Ruby. And all this stuff is developed in coordination with rubygems.org. And that takes time, too. Everything takes time. Now, the thing I spend my time thinking about, security. So, if you would ever like to understand the buzzword that will instantly get you funding for security work, pay close attention. Repeat after me. Software, supply chain, security. Yeah, software, supply chain, security. That is all the rage right now. And being that rubygems.org provides software that is supposedly part of the supply chain, and people care about security these days, software supply chain security is kind of my job. And what's wild is, like, governments now care about this. As I said, German STF funding open source software. The US government is putting out white papers saying C is bad, don't write software in C. This is government wording. I'm just going to read it because it's fun. The security of software used by the government is vital to the government's ability to perform its critical functions. The development of commercial software often lacks transparency, sufficient focus on the ability of the software to resist attack. I'd often say it lacks any focus on that, but that's just me. And adequate controls to prevent tampering by malicious actors. Wait, you mean I shouldn't just give everyone root on my machine? There is a pressing need to implement more rigorous and predictable mechanisms for ensuring that products function securely and as intended. The security and integrity of critical software. Software that performs functions critical to trust, such as affording or requiring elevated system privileges or direct access to networking and computing resources, aka like software, is a particular concern. Accordingly, the government must take action to rapidly improve the security and integrity of the software supply chain with a priority on addressing critical software. Now, I read this quote because, again, wild to me that the federal government, like the President of the United States, is talking about software security. And it's also relevant. Because, like it or not, our random Ruby gems have somehow become critical commercial software, according to the US government. Again, like it or not. How do we deal with this reality? Well, we run a bug bounty program. On HackerOne, we've gotten a couple hundred reports. Each one of those reports takes time to triage. Some reports require a lot of testing to figure out, hey, is this bug actually a bug? Is it actually a vulnerability? I tried to fix it. Does my fix actually fix it? And of those 430 reports we've received, we have fixed 64 real issues. And there have also been so many reports that are just useless. And those also take time to triage. We've helped contribute to a document that CISA and the US Department of Homeland Security has put out in coordination with the OpenSSF called the Principles for Package Repository Security. rubygems.org is a package repository. We're trying to figure out what does best practices look like for running something like rubygems.org. Do those best practices include, say, Sam being able to SSH on the machine and just do whatever he wants in the database? Probably not, but baby steps. We've started the process, thanks to funding from Alpha Omega, on a third-party audit, which means we have to scope what do we want them to audit? And how do we stay within a very limited budget? Because security auditing contracting firms are quite expensive, as you might imagine, because who really wants to read your software and figure out, does it have security vulnerabilities? And then we have to coordinate once we do all that on, we think we fixed this. Do you agree we fixed this? Yes, no, back and forth. And finally, the thing that we all think about when we think about security is security attacks. People publish malicious gems. Gasp, I know, who would have thought? People like to typo squat. Have you ever tried to install the gem Riles? It is a very common typo, I have learned. There's also a type of attack called dependency confusion, where I figure out, hey, I think that this company has a private gem named this. What if I publish that to rubygems.org? Maybe they'll end up downloading my version. And if they do, maybe I can exfiltrate some data. Maybe you've got some nice juicy secrets sitting in env that I can post to a random paste bin. And then there's the attacks question mark. A fun example of this is there was one day where I was on call. That's not very specific. I'm on call every day. There was one particular day. It was during the time of day when I was on call, and I got paged because, site was getting a bunch of 500s, and we alert on that. Why am I getting paged? I look at the logs. Why is there one IP address making 10,000 requests per second to the site? Then we go, why is the site down? Why is the site down? Oh, there's a security researcher from a university in China who is literally hitting every endpoint for every gem in the whole system. We had an index, things stopped being so sad, and then very unpolitely told the researcher to stop it, knock it off, and if you'd like to do research on Ruby gems, please go download the data dump so I don't get paged. And in my copious spare time, I've actually been working on a research project on the Ruby Gems ecosystem. I named it very imaginatively Ruby Gems Research. And the goal of this is to make incident response across the ecosystem easier, heavily inspired by some work that my colleagues on the Python security team have written about. So I have every gem and every file in every gem indexed in a Postgres database. Going back to yesterday, I did try using SQLite. I had a sad time, rewrote the whole thing. It happens. I'm going to be building in full text search for every file in every gem. So we can find out, say, how often is this constant used, or how often does this pattern appear? Built out file-level diffs between versions, so if something that might seem suspicious happens, we can see, hey, what changed between these two versions of a gem? And I actually got to put all of this into use a couple months ago. Does everyone remember when the internet lost its mind about XZ a couple months ago? Yeah, so as a put security hat on, as a security professional, it was my job to investigate how screwed were we exactly by all this. And it was very important to respond quickly because everyone was going to ask that. So in addition to verifying pretty quickly that, hey, rubygems.org, the website, isn't affected, luckily, I wanted to make sure that our ecosystem was also unaffected, that rubygems.org wasn't being used as an attack vector against all of you. So I was able to search, because I had every file, hey, what files in all 1.5 million gems have a file named XZ? How many have liblzma? It turns out there were, I think, 2 gems that shipped liblzma, and they were from 2012, so I didn't care. And within a couple hours, I was able to say, hey, all of rubygems.org unaffected by this. I was pretty happy to get that over with, like, before dinner time. There's also some improvements that I am working on now. So SigStore is the biggest buzzword in the buzzword that is software supply chain security for this year. Building out a SigStore client is my big project for 2024. Their slogan is Sign, Verify, Protect. And the idea behind SigStore is basically you can make sure that the software you download is what it claims to be. If you download a version of Rails, you want to make sure that it actually comes from the Rails GitHub org and is, published by them and signed by them and hasn't been tampered with since they released that version. All that good stuff. There's also a feature called Trusted Publishing that I shipped in December and keep on trying to advocate for, both subtly and not so subtly. Adopt Trusted Publishing. The idea is let you automate publishing gems from CI. Do it without any persistent credentials, so you don't have to make an API key that's valid for forever and give it to GitHub and let anyone then use it to do whatever your account can do. No more 2FA dance to try and automate gem publishing, because that got real annoying real fast. And, well, if that sounds interesting to you, and even if it doesn't sound interesting to you, I don't really care. I want you to do it. You can come set it up for your gems at my campfire this afternoon. Come set it up, please. Gotta get those adoption numbers up. I have my monthly report to write, and I want you to be a positive statistic in that. So to close it out, let's thank the sponsors. This is all made possible by contributions from people like you, hopefully your companies and security-minded organizations like the German government, the OpenSSF from the Linux Foundation, AWS, Shopify, and more. And I also need to thank my wife because she allowed me to talk her into coming here the week after our wedding. So thank you, Hannah, for letting us do this. Sorry it isn't warmer here. I know I kind of promised you a beach vacation. So thank you. Again, I am Samuel Giddins, the security engineer in residence at Ruby Central. Thank you, and let's hang out this afternoon.